Unfortunately, with the bad news of what we've seen as the greatest bottom up wealth transfer in American history happening right now, with what is the one big, beautiful bill coming out of this Republican Congress, we need some positive news. And that is why I am so excited to talk to Dr. Abdul Al Sayed, who is running for Senate in Michigan. Abdul, thank you so much for joining the show.
Jack, thank you so much for having me, especially after you just finished up your college graduation. Congratulations to you.
Very exciting, and we got to hop right in because what else would we be doing if not doing the work? So, with this bill in mind, and really putting into context what's happened throughout the entirety of the beginning of this Trump administration, I see so many people, and I know you must as well, when you're out on the road thinking, what do we do next? How do we fight back? The entire goal of this administration has been to make us feel like government can't work. But it can, and you've been presenting an aspirational view of government and how we can make it work for everyone with your campaign. Can you talk more about that and what you've been hearing on the road?
Yeah, Jack, I really appreciate that question because look, I think the hard part about this is we're so furious about all of the insane things coming out of the White House and Congress is just following along that sometimes we forget that it's not enough to just fight back. We actually have to have something to fight for. And so to me, I try and keep my eyes on the prize of what that thing is. I want to live in an America where people don't feel an incessant level of insecurity about their lives, where they can work one job and take care of themselves and their family, aspire to own a home and afford that home, to be able to go and shop and know that they're buying food that was grown by an artisan who put love and care into that food in soil that was clean, that was grown with pure water and clean air, where if you are eating that food, it's sustaining you and growing your brain and not necessarily full of the stuff that's just growing a belly. Where if you get sick, you can go and see a doctor without having to worry about what the consequences will be for your pocketbook or your future. Where you know that every educational opportunity available to you or your young ones is there without having to worry about whether or not you're going to have to take on a huge loan or pay that down for the rest of your life, where you know that you are supported in your workplace because you have the right to join a union or form one in a place where that's not the case, but you know also that the person you work for is somebody who lives in your community, who is committed to you because you can look them in the eye, because we built an economy rather than being focused on the Fortune 500 is focused on the fortunes of the 350 million of us, that's built on small businesses and the opportunities that you have to build and scale and grow one. Those are the kinds of things that I think all of us want, and we can have those things. The problem, though, is that our system has been rigged by huge corporations and the people who benefit from them to make sure that we are nothing but piggy banks for them to be able to monetize, whether it's on healthcare or the environment or it's the economy itself. And so we've got to know what we're fighting for to understand why we need to fight against what we're seeing out of this administration. I just hope that we can come at this from the level of joy and hope for the future that allows us to win that future.
Yeah, and that's what's been a little difficult with what we've been discussing because so many people and very rightfully so in many instances view Democrats as maybe too comfortable or too caring about the status quo. Right, that's what we want to defend. But now the status quo has become like Medicaid and Social Security, and so we should defend those things. Not all big American institutions that have kept hundreds of millions out of poverty for the past few decades. Those are not bad things, but of course we want bigger, bolder, more progressive visions of how our country cannot just survive, but thrive. How have you kind of tried to square that? Someone who is more progressive in talking about the things that we need to maintain, but also like what we need to expand. Again, I just keep coming back to this, which is like, how can we make people excited again about what we as Democrats can do? How do we do that?
Yeah, Jack, I really appreciate you because when they're trying to drag you backwards, it's almost
Hmm.
like you're fighting to stay exactly where you are. But the problem with that is that that's not really how elections work.
Yeah.
When you're fighting for exactly where you are, if that's a place that's created a lot of pain for a lot of people, you don't have a compelling message about what it is that you offer as an alternative. And so we find ourselves in this situation, which feels kind of natural in the moment, trying to claw onto what we already have, even if that thing actually wasn't quite working the way it ought to. I always talk about Medicaid and say that it's the best, worst program in the country in the
Hmm.
sense that it is so critical as a lifeline for people in so many communities to be able to have healthcare. It funds healthcare for every other kid in Michigan. It's also the infrastructure that provides 80% of mental health care services in our country. It operates to provide critical resources in schools. It is a critical lifeblood for some of our most important rural hospitals. So Medicaid is absolutely important. But the version of Medicaid that we have right now has been so gutted already, right? That the reimbursement rates are so low that a lot of clinicians don't even take it. And so you end up, if you're on Medicaid, as a second-class citizen. And we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time and say, hey, listen, keeping Medicaid isn't actually the only thing we want to do. We want to keep and build and grow, right? I literally wrote the book. If folks can see it over my shoulder, I wrote the book on Medicare for All. That's where I think we should go. I think every single person in our country should have access to affordable, accessible healthcare without having to pay a bullshit thing called a premium or a deductible or a copay, that it should be there for you regardless of the circumstances of your life, whether you turned 26, whether you got married, got divorced, got a job, lost a job, whatever the circumstances are, that it's there for you and you know you can have it. It is the fundamental infrastructure of a life to know that you can get healthy again if you get sick. That's what we have to keep as a North Star. Now, gutting Medicaid doesn't get us in that direction, but pretending like Medicaid itself was perfect from the jump doesn't do that either. What we want is to be able to build upon and expand upon, and we have to be always talking about what we're for rather than just what we're against. And the last point I want to make on this is that one of the things Trump does really well is he's very, very good at recognizing people's pain and articulating it back to them. And he exploits that over and over and over to bring himself to power and frankly make the pain worse. What we have to be able to do is to identify the pain that people have and work with them to make it better. And the hard part is that when you're defending the status quo, what that reads to most people is that you actually don't see their pain in the first place because you're advocating for a situation in which they're in pain. And I think we always have to bring it back to the people that we're serving to be able to articulate their pain back to them, but be that loving presence that says, hey, it doesn't have to be this hard. It can actually be better. We can actually heal. And I'll tell you, as somebody who trained as a physician, that's the work that I trained to do, to be able to meet people in pain and speak to them in ways that say, here's what's on the table and what we can do. How do we work together to get there?
What have you heard from young people who, I feel like a lot of my generation wants to disengage right now, but more specifically young men, that makes you think that there is a lane that Democrats can find with these guys? I hate this approach by so many that treats like speaking to young men like it's some safari. Like, ooh, we got to crack the code on these people. It's like they just want good jobs and dignity and to be spoken to like normal people. What have you heard from these guys on the campaign trail?
Yeah, Jack, I appreciate you calling me young. I just turned 40, so I have this weird ambivalent relationship to my age. I'm like, am I young? Am I like, oh, I don't even know. But I'll tell you this, as a person who was quite recently a young man, I know a lot about the fact that too often young men tend to be the only people that progressives like you and me will blame for their own problems, right? And it's sanctioned to be able to say, well, they just this loneliness crisis is a made up thing. And I think in the same way that it has become incredibly painful to live and try and thrive in America, that for young men in particular, there are a number of different ways in which society has given a pass to corporations and others to exploit young men. And you see it in so many different ways. I just think about like sports betting, right? Yeah. Now, look, if you want to place a sports bet, that's good on you. But the notion that sports betting should be pushed on you every single time you try and just turn on a game, that is a way that a whole system, an industry, has weaponized a certain product in ways that are going to disproportionately affect people who are potentially suffering with problematic gambling. And I know people in my life who are like, I just can't watch sports anymore for that reason. And then you think about like the pornification of like everything. Yeah. And then what happens is over time, right, in the ways that you get exploited and your dopamine receptors get hijacked, right, now you are frustrated, you feel alone, you turn into an online manosphere where people are at least accepting of the pain in which you're living, but they're giving you an answer to the problem, which is weaponizing you against women in your life, against broader society. And I think that we have to create a space in which we are willing to have a conversation with young men that doesn't blame them for the ways that they get exploited by folks who are trying to make money on them, but instead is able to create a space where folks can actually be vulnerable and we can talk together about what it means to live in a society where all of us have our needs taken care of. I think what's happened is that people are getting angrier, they're getting lonelier, they're getting sadder. And at least they find in this manosphere a place where people are willing to say, well, it's not actually your fault, but it's actually the fault of a young woman over there. And I say this as a father of daughters. I don't want my little girls growing up in a world where their success is perceived to come at the cost of their brother's success. I want to live in a world where all of us are engaging and empowering each other. And look, when it comes to masculinity, every time it's talked about in our spaces, there's always an adjective that you hear right before it. I don't think we talk about any other group of people that way. And I think we probably should stop talking about masculinity that way. And what I'd rather, especially for the young men out there, the point that I'm trying to make to you is, hey, I believe in the idea of masculinity where rather than pushing on somebody who's weaker than you, that you are about empowering and promoting and protecting and providing, right? That's the kind of masculinity I learned about. And I think we need to be able to embrace that in a space that says that all of us can, in fact, be equal. And all of us ought to use our particular strengths in ways that benefit one another. And that's what I hope that we can start calling ourselves to, while at the same time calling out the ways that these corporations are starting to monetize young men in ways that are robbing them of their time and their access to other people who they love in their lives.
No, it's so important. I'm glad that you're talking about it. And of course, I wanted to close. This is one of the biggest and most competitive primaries on the Democratic side, probably in the country, for one of the most important seats. Lots of competition, but what is going to separate your campaign from that of the opponents in this race right now? What's different about your campaign? Of course, we're very excited about all the Democrats who are trying to run for this seat right now, but what's going to separate you?
Well, I think it really comes down to authenticity. I never wanted to be a politician. I want to be a doctor. And as I sat with people asking what's wrong and how can I help, too often the answer to what was wrong had a lot more to do with the pathology in our politics than the pathology in their bodies. The air you breathe, the water you drink, your access to healthy foods, or access to a clinic in the first place. Those are the things that we need to address. And I don't take corporate money because I've recognized that too often Democrats are in this position where they want to say the right things to voters, but they also don't want to piss off their donors. And so they end up trying to triangulate a message, which is not true to the problems that they see because they want to keep taking that corporate check. And so you end up with Democrats who have this watered down milquetoast message that isn't specific about what they actually want to do, but they say it with a lot of enthusiasm. And when you say nothing at all with a lot of enthusiasm, you lose elections and you also sound ridiculous, which unfortunately too often Democrats do. In my case, I don't really want this job to have the job. I want the job to be able to solve the problems. And I'm not willing to take money from the people who are on the wrong side of the problem. And so what that allows me to do is talk very specifically about the kinds of things that I want to take on. This last interview probably just got me a whole bunch of money that's going to be spent against me from the gaming industry. Well, I welcome the money spent because they're on the wrong side of a lot of people's pain. And if you think about this job rather than as a job, but rather as a responsibility, it changes the way that you approach the job. And that's the way that I think about it. I see it as an extension of the work that I swore to do when I went to medical school. And so that's what you're going to get that's different. And I hope that folks will come check us out, abdulforsenate.com. You can follow me at Abdul Al Sayed on all the major platforms. And I think you're going to see that I'm somebody who's just willing to tell you how I see it and speak directly to the problems. And if you find directness and authenticity refreshing, I think you'll have a lot to see in this campaign.
Well, I've loved watching your campaign. It's given me a lot of hope. You know, there are not as many people as we need with this aspirational vision. You have it. I'm going to link all your stuff below for anyone who wants to check out the campaign. I strongly suggest you do. Abdul, from one guy with a microphone, Columbia grad, to another, I appreciate you coming on so much, brother.
Hey, Jack, I really appreciate you. And I'm grateful for the work that you do. And thank you for calling us to that higher truth and the opportunity to spend some time today. We'll have to compare notes. And at some point, you're going to have to give me your hair routine. I got a lot of work to do here, but maybe I'll get there someday.
Maybe one day. All right. I appreciate it, man.